There is a moment in 1966 that most football historians have quietly chosen to forget, a moment when the greatest player at the World Cup sat alone in a tunnel and wept, not from joy but from something far older and far heavier. What broke inside him that night had nothing to do with football, and everything to do with where he came from. They called him the Black Panther, they called him the new Pelé, they called him the greatest player Europe had ever seen. But almost no one knew that just a few years before those headlines, a teenager had arrived in Lisbon with nothing, sleeping on floors, eating almost nothing, and begging not to be sent back to a place that no longer felt like home. The story begins not in Europe but on the other side of the world, in a city that sat between two realities, the colonial grandeur of Portuguese Mozambique and the grinding poverty of the African neighborhoods that powered it from below. Lourenço Marques was a city of contradictions, beautiful and brutal, full of music and full of silence that meant something dangerous. It was here, in 1942, that a boy was born to a Mozambican mother and a Portuguese father who would vanish from his life before the boy was old enough to remember his face. His father died when the boy was only 8 years old, leaving behind a mother, 7 children, and almost no money. But what he also left behind, completely by accident, was a son with legs that seemed built by something other than ordinary biology. The streets of the neighborhood became his first stadium, bare feet on red dirt, a ball made from whatever could be bound together tightly enough to roll, and a talent so visible that adults would stop walking just to watch a child move. But talent in a colonial city in the 1950s was not enough. It had to be noticed by the right people, who were almost always the wrong kind of people, and the world that surrounded this boy was built in every way to make sure someone like him stayed invisible. He found his way to the local club Sporting de Lourenço Marques, not through any grand invitation but through sheer relentless presence, showing up day after day until the coaches could no longer pretend they had not seen what they had seen. Word traveled across the ocean, but it traveled into the wrong hands first, because Sporting Lisbon had a direct connection to their Mozambican affiliate and they believed this extraordinary teenage talent belonged to them, which would set off a chain of events that nearly destroyed the young man before his career had even begun. Stories like this one, of talent uprooted, traded, and nearly broken by the systems that were supposed to celebrate it, never make it into the history books, and that is exactly why they need to be told. If you believe football history deserves the full truth, follow Football Untold. We go where the cameras never went. He arrived in Lisbon in 1961 under circumstances so murky that multiple accounts still disagree on the details. What is certain is that he was supposed to go to Sporting Lisbon, and instead, in one of the most dramatic transfers of the era, he ended up somewhere else entirely. Benfica, the other giant of Lisbon, moved with startling speed and audacity, effectively persuading the young man to honor a connection to their own Mozambican feeder club instead. A decision that would fuel a rivalry so bitter it became part of Portuguese football mythology. The legal battles raged, the courts intervened, and for a period that felt endless to the young man caught in the middle, he was forbidden from playing competitive football entirely, a cage built from paperwork around the most electric talent in Europe. But the moment the legal silence lifted, what happened next was so sudden and so total that it made everyone who had doubted or delayed him look not just wrong, but foolish. In his first full season with Benfica he scored an almost impossible number of goals, but it was a single match, the European Cup final of 1962 in Amsterdam, that announced to the entire world that something genuinely new had arrived in football. Real Madrid, the greatest club on earth at that moment, the team of Di Stefano and Puskas, were 3 goals ahead at halftime, and what the young man from the streets of Mozambique did in the second half entered football legend almost immediately. He scored twice in the first 12 minutes of the second half, then made 2 more, and Benfica won 5-3, a result so stunning that newspapers across Europe ran out of superlatives before the morning editions were printed. Di Stefano, the greatest player of his generation, is reported to have watched from the pitch and simply shaken his head, not in defeat but in the particular recognition that passes between people who understand what true greatness looks like. The 1960s belonged to him in a way that is difficult to fully communicate today. 9 Portuguese league titles, 2 European Cups, the European Footballer of the Year award, and a personal tally of goals that made statisticians reach for new categories. But the chapter that most people remember, the one that still brings a particular kind of ache when football people discuss it, was the World Cup in England in 1966, where he arrived as one of the most anticipated players the tournament had ever seen. He did not just meet the expectation, he detonated it, and the match against North Korea in the quarter-final became one of the most extraordinary individual performances in World Cup history. A moment where one man dragged an entire nation back from the edge of elimination. 3 goals down at halftime. No one gave Portugal any chance. And then, one by one, he dismantled the impossible, finishing the match with 4 goals and an assist in a 5-3 victory that remains one of the most discussed comebacks in the history of the competition. The semi-final against England. Wembley. And then the moment that opens this story, the tunnel, the tears, the weight of something that went far beyond football. England won 1-0. A controversial goal. A goal that many people, including members of the Portugal squad, believed should not have stood. He said nothing publicly. He carried it privately for the rest of his life. He finished the tournament as its top scorer with 9 goals, the Golden Boot. He was voted the best player at the World Cup. And still Portugal had not won it. Some victories are so complicated they cannot be celebrated cleanly. What followed in the years after 1966 was the beginning of the end of his peak powers. Injuries took time, age took more, and the political world around him shifted in ways that made even his nationality complicated to inhabit. Portugal was still a dictatorship. Mozambique was moving toward independence. His own identity, African and Portuguese, colonial subject and national hero, was never something the official story found it comfortable to acknowledge directly. He retired from Benfica in 1978, having scored over 720 goals in official matches, a number that places him among a tiny group of footballers in all of history, a fact that is still not as widely known as it deserves to be. He died in January 2014. The tributes that came were enormous and sincere. But even in those tributes, something was quietly missing: the full story of where he came from, what he overcame, and what it cost a boy from the dust streets of Mozambique to become a symbol for a country that had not always been willing to fully see him. The statue outside the stadium in Lisbon shows him mid-stride, the way he always looked, moving forward, unstoppable, towards something just ahead. But statues show you the legend. They do not show you the boy with no shoes, the teenager lost in a foreign city, or the man who cried in a tunnel because the world had still not given him the one thing he had earned. The greatest players are not the ones the trophies remember. They are the ones whose lives, when you look at them honestly and completely, make you understand what human beings are capable of when the world gives them almost nothing to start with. This has been his story. The real one. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told in full, follow Football Untold. Because history does not run out of secrets, and we are only just beginning.